I took a night bus home for 7 years, and one winter I realized the driver had been stopping at places that did not exist on any map. The night bus was never supposed to stop anywhere except the main road, the depot, and my block, but one winter I realized the driver had been pulling over at places that did not exist on any map. I used to think the night bus was the most ordinary part of my life. Not because it was comfortable, it was. Not because it was safe, sometimes it definitely was. But because for 7 years it was just the thing I did. I worked late, I lived too far from the city to justify a cab every night, and the last bus home ran at 12:40 a.m. It was old, always a little too warm inside, and smelled like wet coats, cheap perfume, and the heater blowing dust through the vents. Half the passengers were half asleep. The other half were either drunk, exhausted, or quietly miserable in a way that only night shift people understand. I knew the route better than I knew some of my neighbors. Stop by stop, I could have drawn it from memory. The bakery that closed at 11, the pharmacy with the flickering green sign, the gas station where the bright lights made everything outside look dead and flat. Then the long stretch by the river, where the windows turned into black mirrors, and all you could see was your own reflection moving with the bus. And the driver had been the same man for years. His name was Victor, or at least that's what his badge said. He was in his 60s, maybe older, with a thick neck, a cropped grey beard, and hands that looked like they had been permanently shaped around a steering wheel. He never smiled much, but he wasn't rude. He just had this quiet, sealed-off way about him, like he was thinking about something far away even while driving us home. He knew the regulars. He nodded at people instead of greeting them. He let the same old woman on at the second stop, even when the bus was technically full, because she always carried the same floral bag and moved slowly enough that nobody complained. I was one of the regulars. Every night, same route, same seat near the back, same headphones in, same blank stare out the window. For 7 years, that was my routine. Then winter came early that year. Not the first frost kind of winter, the real one. The one that seemed to arrive all at once, like somebody had thrown a sheet of ice over the city overnight. The roads were coated with old salt and dirty snow, the bus windows fogged from the inside, and every light outside looked dimmer than it should have. That was the winter things started feeling wrong. At first it was tiny stuff. A streetlight that I knew should have been on the left side of the road was suddenly on the right. A convenience store I passed every night had its signs changed from blue to red, even though I would have sworn it had always been blue. The bus took a turn one night that I didn't recognize, then immediately corrected itself like nothing had happened. I remember noticing that turn because I was half asleep, my forehead pressed to the cold glass, and I looked up just in time to see us passing under a low concrete arch I had never seen before. It was covered in peeling white paint and had no street name on it, just a rusted metal sign with no letters visible in the dark. I frowned and sat up straighter. We had definitely not taken that turn before. I looked around the bus. Nobody else seemed concerned. A man in a puffy coat was sleeping with his mouth open. A girl in a grey scarf was scrolling on her phone. An older guy near the front was staring ahead with the dead-eyed expression of someone who had long ago stopped noticing anything outside his own head. I told myself I had just missed a detour. Roadworks, snow reroute, something normal. Except the next night, it happened again. Not the same turn exactly, but another one. Then another one 3 nights later. The bus was still ending up where it always ended up. My block, my stop, my front door in 20 minutes if I was quick. But the route itself had started to feel unstable. Like the bus was taking side streets it should not have been able to take. I started paying more attention. I moved from my usual seat to one by the window on the right side, because I wanted to see where we were going when the bus drifted off the main road. I stopped listening to music. I stopped looking at my phone. I started watching every turn. That was when I realized Victor wasn't following the route perfectly anymore. He was choosing wrong roads. Not big ones, not enough to make the trip obviously longer, just enough to make my stomach tighten. One night he turned onto a narrow street, lined with bare trees and old brick fences I had never seen before. Another night he drove past a row of abandoned shops with blacked-out windows and a pharmacy sign swinging in the wind, even though there was no such block on any map I knew. Then he took a left into a road so dark it barely seemed maintained, and I had the sudden, irrational feeling that if I checked my phone, there would be no signal at all. I was not the only one noticing it. One evening, a woman in a long wool coat stood up halfway through the ride and asked, "Excuse me, is this the normal route?" Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the bus. Victor looked at her in the mirror. "Road closure on Main," he said. She frowned. There wasn't one earlier today. He shrugged, "Changed after sunset." She sat back down, looking annoyed, but that was the end of it. I remember that moment because it was the first time I heard someone question him out loud, and his answer had been too smooth, too ready, like he had used it before. After that, I started watching the bus driver instead of the road. The thing about night buses is that people think nobody notices anything, but you do. When the same route repeats for years, tiny changes stand out: a missing poster, a different smell, a light that used to be broken and suddenly works, a driver who turns his head just a second too slowly. Victor had a habit I had never thought much about before. Whenever the bus passed under certain streetlights, he would glance left into the mirror and then down at the dashboard as if checking a number or counting something. I had assumed it was just normal driving behavior. Then one night I saw him do it 5 times in less than 2 minutes. Left mirror, dashboard, left mirror, dashboard. His jaw was clenched so hard I could see it from the back of the bus. And then he took a turn that made no sense at all. We should have gone straight down the main road. I know we should have, because I had been riding that bus long enough to map every bend in my head. Instead, Victor turned right into a side street I'd never seen before. Not just I hadn't noticed it. I mean never. The street was too narrow for a bus, but somehow the bus fit. The houses on either side were old and close together, with dark windows and small gates half buried in snow. No people, no parked cars, no traffic, just a long empty lane with one dim yellow lamp at the far end, and beyond it, what looked like a bus stop. A bus stop. Out there in the middle of nowhere. I stared at it, confused, as we rolled toward it. It had a metal pole and a little roof and a bench underneath, the kind of stop you'd expect in a residential district or by a highway, not in a dead little street with no visible connection to anything. The signboard was blank from where I sat. Snow had drifted against the base of the pole. The bus slowed. My entire body went cold. Nobody had asked to get off. Nobody on the bus had even moved. But Victor pulled over anyway. The doors hissed open. And a woman got on. She was elderly, bundled in layers of dark fabric, with a headscarf tied tight under her chin. Her face was pale and narrow, and she climbed the steps slowly, as if she knew exactly where each one was. She didn't look at any of us. She just reached into her coat, took out coins, and dropped them into the fare box with a faint clink. Victor nodded once. Not to her, more-like to himself. Then she walked all the way to the back of the bus, and sat directly across from me. I probably should have looked away. Instead, I looked at her face. She kept her hands folded in her lap, her fingers hidden in her sleeves, and stared straight ahead at nothing. There was something off about her, but I couldn't tell what. She wasn't breathing heavily from the cold. She wasn't looking around. She wasn't even adjusting her coat. She was just sitting there like she had boarded a bus in a dream, and didn't intend to wake up. I wanted to ask if this was a new stop. I wanted to ask why she was here. I wanted to ask Victor where we were. But nobody on the bus reacted, as if anything was strange. Not the sleeping man, not the girl with the phone, not the guy in the puffy coat. Not even the woman in the wool coat, who had clearly been awake enough to question the driver minutes earlier. So I kept my mouth shut. The bus pulled away. I watched the stop shrink behind us in the window. And that was when I noticed something that made my skin prickle. The stop was gone. Not hidden by darkness. Gone. The street behind us had changed. Where the stop had been, there was now just a vacant stretch of snow and a fence line, as if the whole thing had never existed. I blinked hard and leaned forward to look again. Nothing. No pole, no sign, no bench. My pulse started hammering so loudly, I could hear it in my ears. I turned to the elderly woman across from me, but she was already staring at me. Not at my face. At my hands. Then very slowly she looked up and said, in a voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it, "You noticed." I didn't answer. I couldn't. She gave the faintest nod, as if that was enough. Then she leaned back, closed her eyes, and said nothing else for the rest of the ride. I spent the next 3 stops trying to convince myself I had imagined it. Maybe it was a side street. Maybe the stop had been behind another building. Maybe the bus had turned in a way that made it disappear from view. Maybe I was tired. Maybe the cold had gotten into my head. But the dread in my chest wasn't going away. It got worse. Because 5 nights later, we stopped somewhere else that wasn't on any map. And this time, I saw the driver look directly at me in the mirror before he opened the doors. I knew right then that he had been waiting for me to notice. That look in the mirror was not random. It wasn't the tired glance of a bus driver checking his passengers. It was direct, brief, and unmistakably deliberate, like he wanted to make sure I understood this next stop was for me. The bus slowed down again. Outside, the snow was thicker than it had been a minute before, falling in hard white streaks that blurred the streetlights into pale halos. The road curved into darkness ahead, and I could not see any buildings at all. Just a low black shape on the right side of the road, as if a whole block had been erased from the city and replaced with empty space. The bus pulled over. This stop was worse than the first one. The first stop had looked abandoned, almost harmless in a bleak way. This one looked wrong. There was no road sign, no shelter, no bench, no timetable. Just a concrete patch beside the road with a metal pole standing in the middle of it, bent slightly toward the street like it had been left there after a crash. Behind it was a chain-link fence, except the fence didn't seem to enclose anything. It simply ran into the dark and disappeared. No houses. No shops. No lights. Nothing. Victor opened the doors. Nobody moved. The bus was silent, except for the engine and the heater, rattling under the floor. Even the sleeping man in the puffy coat had woken up now, but he just sat there blinking at the open doors like he didn't know where he was. Then the woman across from me stood up. The elderly one with the headscarf. She didn't hesitate, she just walked down the aisle with careful, almost fragile steps and got off the bus. I watched her go, expecting her to turn and vanish into the dark like the stop from before. Instead, she stood on the concrete patch, turned once toward the bus and looked directly at Victor. He lowered his eyes. Not in fear, in resignation. Then she turned away and walked toward the fence. I leaned hard toward the window. My breath fogged the glass immediately. Through the blur, I saw her stop at the fence, reach out and place her hand against it. For a second, nothing happened. Then the snow around her seemed to shift, like the dark beyond the fence was inhaling. And then she was gone. Not behind the fence. Not into the darkness. Gone. The bus doors closed. My entire body locked up. I stared at the empty patch where she had been standing, and I could not process what I had just seen. The bus started moving again, slowly, almost carefully, as if we had disturbed something and needed to leave before it noticed. Nobody spoke. Not a single passenger. I wanted to ask a question so badly it felt physical. Where are we? What stop was that? Who was she? What the hell is going on? But something told me that if I opened my mouth, nothing normal would come out. So I stayed still and watched the road. We drove for about 10 minutes in silence before the woman in the wool coat, who had been quiet the whole time, said, "You shouldn't look at them when they board." I turned toward her so fast, my shoulder hurt. What? She looked straight ahead, not at me. It makes it harder. For what? She didn't answer. I glanced at the people around us. The man in the puffy coat was now staring down at his hands. The guy by the window had crossed himself, very quickly, like he didn't want anyone to notice. The girl with the grey scarf had gone pale, and was gripping her phone so tightly I thought it might break. So other people knew. That was the worst part. Not that something impossible was happening, that bad enough, but that there were rules, implied rules, maybe old rules, rules I had somehow broken by simply watching too closely. I leaned toward the wool-coated woman and lowered my voice. How many stops are there? She finally looked at me, and I immediately regretted asking. Her eyes were red-rimmed and tired, but not sleepy, more like she had been awake for too many nights in a row. I don't know, she said. I stared at her. That's not a normal answer. No, she said, it is. Then she looked away from me and said nothing else. We reached my stop 20 minutes later. Or what I thought was my stop. The bus pulled up to the usual place near my apartment block. Same cracked pavement, same dead street lamp, same half-broken kiosk across the road that sold cigarettes and lottery tickets during the day. Everything looked normal enough that my heart nearly stopped from relief. The doors opened. A burst of freezing air hit the bus. I stood up too fast, grabbed my bag and nearly tripped on the step. My hands were shaking. I wanted out. I wanted away from the bus, from Victor, from the woman with the headscarf, from all of it. As I stepped down, I heard Victor say my name. It's not loud, just enough to freeze me in place. I turned. He was looking at me in the mirror. Not at the road, not at the passengers. At me. What? I asked. His expression hadn't changed, but his eyes looked exhausted, almost sad. Don't go home through the alley tonight, he said. The words were so unexpected that I just stared. Why? He looked past me, out into the dark street, then back at me. Because it's already there. The doors closed. The bus pulled away. I stood alone on the pavement, unable to move, watching the backlights disappear into the snow. For a minute I just stood there, trying to decide whether I had understood him correctly or whether my brain was starting to fail under the stress. Because it was already there. What the hell did that even mean? My apartment block was only 2 minutes away from the bus stop, and the quickest route was through a narrow service alley between two buildings. I took it all the time, every night. It was ugly, dimly lit, and smelled like wet concrete, but it saved 10 minutes. I looked toward the alley. It was dark. Too dark. The entrance was there, but the darkness inside it seemed denser than it should have been, like the night had collected there and refused to move. I remember standing on the sidewalk trying to laugh at myself. I remember telling myself Victor was messing with me, some weird joke, some older driver superstition. Maybe he knew I was nervous and had decided to say something creepy for effect. But I didn't go through the alley. I walked the long way around the block. And that was the first time I heard something following me. Not footsteps exactly. More like the rhythm of a second set of steps, matching mine from a distance I couldn't see. Every time I slowed down, they slowed too. Every time I stopped, they stopped. I crossed the street. The sound stayed on my side. I walked faster. The sound did too. I turned around once sharply, but the road behind me was empty except for the snow blowing across the pavement. Still, I knew something was back there. When I finally reached the front of my apartment building, I had the awful feeling that if I looked to my left, I would see the alley entrance from the other side of the block, and if I looked to my right, I would see nothing at all. So I went inside. My apartment was on the 4th floor. I took the stairs because the elevator had been out for months, and the landlord kept pretending not to care. My palms were slick. My breathing was too fast. Every landing made me feel like I was about to hear someone behind me, but nobody came up the stairs. When I got to my door, I stopped. It was already open. Not wide open, just unlocked and pushed inward a few inches. I knew immediately that I had locked it before leaving that morning. I always locked it. I stood there staring at the crack in the door for what felt like a full minute. Then I reached out and pushed it slowly open. The apartment looked normal. Too normal. The lights were off, the kitchen was dark, my shoes were still by the wall, the towel on the radiator was exactly where I had left it, no drawers open, no broken glass, no signs of forced entry. But the air inside felt wrong. Colder than the hallway. And there was a smell I couldn't place. Not bad exactly, just familiar in a way I couldn't identify, like damp wool or old paper left in a basement. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. That was when I noticed the wet footprints. They started at the front door and led down the hallway. Barely visible. Not muddy, not dirty. Just dark, as if someone had walked in with snow melting off their shoes, and then stood in my apartment long enough for the water to soak into the floor. I followed them with my eyes. They stopped at my bedroom door. I did not go in right away. I just stood there, frozen, looking at the line of prints on the floor, and trying to convince myself this had some ordinary explanation. Maybe I had left the door open and the wind had blown it in. Maybe a neighbor had come in by mistake. Maybe I had come home too worked up and was seeing patterns where there were none. Then I heard it. A sound from my bedroom. Not a voice. Not movement. Just the soft, unmistakable creak of a bed frame under weight. Someone was sitting there. Inside my room. I could not breathe. I took one step backward. Then another. And from behind the bedroom door, in a voice so quiet it almost blended into the apartment silence, something said, "You were never supposed to come home before the last stop." I went completely still. That sentence came from my bedroom in a voice so calm and matter-of-fact that it was somehow worse than if it had shouted. It sounded like someone stating a rule, not making a threat, like I had committed a mistake and was being informed of it too late to fix anything. I didn't answer. My whole body felt numb, except for my heart, which was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The apartment was silent again after the voice, but silence didn't make me feel better. It made the room feel occupied. Then I heard the bed creak again. Slowly, as if whoever was in there had shifted their weight and was now waiting to see what I would do. I backed up until my shoulders hit the hallway wall. I remember thinking very clearly that I needed to leave, not call out, not check, not prove anything, just leave the apartment, go downstairs, and get back onto the street where at least the world made some kind of sense. But my keys were on the little table by the door. My phone was in my coat pocket, and if I turned to reach for either of them, I would have to take my eyes off the bedroom. So I stood there staring at the door, waiting for it to open. It didn't. Instead, from inside the room, I heard another sound. A soft, deliberate tap. Once, then again. 3 times total. Not on wood. On glass. I don't know why that terrified me more than the voice, but it did. My bedroom window faced the courtyard behind the building. There was no reason anyone should be tapping on it from the inside, unless they were in the room with me, and there was something in there I hadn't seen yet. I swallowed hard and said the stupidest thing possible. "Who's there?" The second the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Nothing answered. Then the apartment light flickered on. I jerked so hard I almost shouted. The bedroom door was still closed, but now I could see the dim strip of light at the bottom and the outline of the frame more clearly. The door itself looked normal, harmless even, like something belonging to a different apartment entirely. Then I noticed that the wet footprints had changed. There were now 2 sets. The original line from the door to my bedroom was still there, but a second line had appeared beside it. Smaller, barefoot. It started from the kitchen. I nearly lost my mind right there. I had not looked into the kitchen yet. I had been staring at the bedroom door the entire time, but now I saw those faint prints on the floor, crossing the tile and stopping just before the hallway, as if something had walked from the kitchen to stand somewhere behind me while I was focused on the bedroom. I spun around. Nothing. The kitchen was dark except for the overhead light reflecting off the counter. The sink was empty. The chair was pushed in. The little radio by the window was off. Everything looked exactly as I had left it. But on the counter was an object I had not seen before. A bus ticket. I stood there staring at it. My first thought was that I had dropped it from my coat pocket. Then I saw the time printed on it. 12:40 a.m. The exact time of the bus I had just taken. Except the stop location printed on the bottom was not my usual route. It was one of the strange ones. The one with no address. The one Victor had never spoken about. My legs felt weak. I grabbed the kitchen chair just to steady myself and stared at the ticket until the numbers blurred. That was when I made the worst decision of the night. I walked to the bedroom door and put my hand on the knob. I don't know why, curiosity, I guess, or panic, or the stupid human instinct to find out what's behind the closed door even when every cell in your body is telling you not to. The knob was cold. I turned it. The door opened inward with almost no sound. My bedroom was empty. My bed was made. My closet door was shut. My desk lamp was off. No person, no shadow, no movement. Just my room exactly as it should have been. Except for one thing. The window was open. Not wide, just enough for cold air to seep in, thin and sharp. And on the sill, resting in a neat little pile, were 3 coins and a folded piece of paper. I stood in the doorway staring for what felt like forever. Then I crossed the room and picked up the paper with shaking fingers. It was blank on the outside. Inside, in writing so neat it almost looked printed, there were only 4 words. Do not miss the last stop. I sat down on the edge of my bed without meaning to. My mind had gone weirdly quiet. That was the scariest part. Not the fear itself, but how quickly fear turned into a kind of hollow disbelief, like my brain was trying to protect itself by refusing to fully understand what was happening. I looked back at the bedroom window. The glass was frosted at the edges from the cold. The latch was open. Snow was drifting in through a tiny gap. I crossed the room and shut it. Outside, the courtyard was empty. No one below, no movement, no shadow in the snow. I should have called someone then. Anyone, my brother, my friend Pavel. The police maybe, though I knew how insane it would sound. But I didn't. I just sat there in the cold air, reading the note again and again until the words stopped feeling like words at all. Do not miss the last stop. What last stop? And why had someone been in my apartment to tell me that? I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the bus doors opening. I heard Victor's voice in my head. I heard the tapping from the bedroom window. Once, around 4 a.m., I was sure I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment, but when I checked through the peephole, there was nothing there. The next day I called in sick to work. I spent the entire morning trying to figure out whether I should tell somebody. My landlord maybe, but what was I supposed to say? A stranger may or may not have been in my apartment, left me a note about a bus stop that doesn't exist, and warned me not to miss the last stop of a route I've ridden for 7 years. I would sound insane. So I did what people do when they're scared and ashamed, and have no idea what else to do. I convinced myself there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe someone had gotten into my apartment through the window. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe Victor had somehow left the note. Maybe I had been half asleep the night before and imagined half of it. But none of those explanations made the wet footprints disappear. None of them explained the ticket. And none of them explained why, when I checked the back of the bus ticket more carefully later that afternoon, there was a second stamp on it in faded ink. Final service. 12:40. Terminal 9. I had never heard of Terminal 9. Not once in 7 years. I searched it online, nothing useful came up. No map entry, no public transit listing. No station photos, just random mentions in old forums, vague references buried in local discussion boards, and one message from years ago that only said, "If you ever end up at Terminal 9, do not speak to the driver." That was enough to ruin my day. And it should have been enough to keep me off the bus that night. But I still went. I told myself I was only going because I needed answers. That was a lie. The truth was simpler. I was terrified that if I didn't get on that bus, whatever had come to my apartment would come back. So I left early, walked to the stop with my hood up and my hands in my pockets, and waited in the freezing dark with my stomach turning over and over. The bus arrived 2 minutes late. It looked the same from the outside. Old, yellowed headlights, scratched windows, steam coming from the wheel wells. I almost laughed from the relief of seeing something familiar, and then the doors opened and I saw Victor looking directly at me. He did not seem surprised. He did not seem confused. He looked as if he had been expecting me to return. I stepped onto the bus. The heater blasted hot air at my face. The familiar smell of dust and old fabric hit me immediately. Most of the seats were empty, but the ones that weren't felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. The woman with the grey scarf was gone. The puffy coat man was gone. Even the woman in the wool coat was nowhere to be seen. Only 3 passengers remained. A man in a dark coat near the front. A girl I didn't recognize, sitting under the rear window. And the elderly woman with the headscarf. She was back, sitting in the exact same place across from where I usually sat. She looked up at me, and for the first time I saw something like pity in her face. I sat down slowly. The bus doors closed behind me. Victor checked the mirror, then started the engine. The city lights began to slide past the windows. And this time, instead of taking the usual road, the bus turned at the first intersection onto a street I had never seen in my life. The bus turned off the main road so smoothly that for a second I thought I'd imagined it. That was the terrifying thing about being on it now. Nothing happened with any kind of dramatic warning. No scream, no jolt, no blaring horn. The driver simply took a turn where no turn should have existed, and the world outside the window changed as if it had always been that way. The street ahead was narrow, lined with dark buildings whose windows were all unlit. Snow lay in uneven piles along the curbs. There were no cars parked anywhere, no pedestrians, no signs, just this silent corridor of old brick and black glass stretching farther than it should have. I looked toward Victor in the mirror. He was watching the road, but his eyes flicked to mine for a split second. Not welcoming, not angry. Warning. The elderly woman across from me folded her hands in her lap and said nothing. The girl in the rear seat had her hood up and her face hidden. The man in the dark coat stared straight ahead, motionless, like he was trying to become part of the seat. I leaned slightly toward the aisle and whispered, "Where are we going?" Nobody answered. The bus kept moving. After a while I realized the street had no traffic lights, no lane markings, and no intersections. It just went on, bending in ways that made no sense for the geography of the city I knew. I kept expecting the route to reconnect to something familiar, but it never did. Then I saw the first sign that this was not a normal detour. A bus stop appeared on the right side of the road. Except it wasn't a bus stop I recognized. It was like the others and unlike them at the same time. A concrete pad, a thin metal pole, a little shelter with cloudy plastic panels, but above it, instead of a route number, there was a cracked illuminated panel glowing a weak red. No street name, no district, no map marker. Just a single word. Late. The bus slowed. My entire body tensed. The elderly woman across from me finally spoke without looking at me. Don't watch the door, she said, just let them on. I stared at her. What do you mean, them? She didn't answer. The doors hissed open. And for a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard footsteps. Not one set, several. They came from the dark beyond the shelter, slow and uneven, as if whoever was approaching was not fully synchronized with the ground beneath them. I couldn't see them clearly at first because the lights from inside the bus reflected in the glass. All I saw were vague shapes moving toward the opening. One by one, 3 figures boarded. I wish I could say they looked like people. They mostly did. That was the problem. The first was a man in a long coat with his collar pulled up so high it hid half his face. He moved with the stiff, careful steps of someone recovering from an injury. The second was a woman carrying a grocery bag that looked too heavy for her, though I couldn't tell what was inside it. The third was a boy, maybe 16, wearing a school jacket too thin for the weather. They each paid their fare in silence. And then they sat down. The man took the front row. The woman sat near the middle. The boy came all the way to the back and sat 2 seats behind me. I did not turn around. I could feel him there anyway. There was something about the way they boarded that made my skin crawl, not because they were dirty or strange-looking. It was because they behaved like people arriving late to an appointment they knew they should not miss. Victor closed the doors and drove on. The bus remained silent for several minutes. The only sounds were the engine, the heater, and the occasional rattle of the windows when the tires hit a patch of ice. Then, very softly, the boy in the back said, "Is this the right one?" No one answered him. He repeated it, louder this time. "Is this the right one?" The man in the dark coat finally turned around halfway and said, without emotion, "Not if you remember too much." The boy went still. I felt a chill spread across my spine. Before I could process that, the elderly woman across from me let out a quiet sigh and pressed her fingers to her forehead. She looked exhausted, more than exhausted, like she was carrying the weight of something older than tiredness. I leaned toward her and said under my breath, "What are they talking about?" Her gaze flicked to mine. Then she asked, "What was the last thing you remember before boarding tonight?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Before the bus," she said, "your mind has to stay in the right order, otherwise you miss the shape of the place." I stared at her. The shape of the place. It sounded insane, but the way she said it made it sound like a technical problem, not a mystical one. "I got off work," I said slowly. "I walked to the stop." She nodded once. "Good. Good. Then you're still mostly yours." I nearly laughed, but nothing about her face suggested she was joking. The bus took another turn. Then another. The street outside gradually thinned into something emptier than the rest of the city had any right to be. Buildings started spacing farther apart. The snow got deeper. Streetlights appeared only every few hundred meters, and when the bus passed them, the light they cast seemed too weak to reach the sidewalk. Then I saw the river. Or something like it. A black ribbon of water, frozen at the edges, running beside the road. I knew immediately that we were nowhere near the route I normally took home. The river by my apartment block was on the opposite side of the city. There was no way the bus could have reached this one unless it had crossed half the district. I looked at the driver. Victor's jaw was clenched. His hands were steady, but his knuckles were white. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked afraid. That scared me more than anything else. The bus slowed again. This time there was no stop sign I could see at first, just a wide open area of snow beside the road, bordered by a line of dead trees. Then as the bus pulled closer, I saw there was a platform there, old stone, half covered in ice. A lamp stood at one end, its bulb glowing weakly through the snow. At the far edge of the platform was a staircase, descending into darkness. Not a tunnel, not a subway entrance, just a stairway going down into nothing visible. The bus stopped. Every passenger except me and the boy in the back seemed to know what was coming. The man in the dark coat rose first and got off without hesitation. The woman with the grocery bag followed, clutching the bag to her chest. The boy looked like he wanted to ask something, but the elderly woman gave him a slight shake of her head, and he went too. The doors closed. The bus kept idling. I turned to the woman in the headscarf and asked, in the smallest voice I could manage, "Where do they go?" She took a long time to answer. Then she said, "Sometimes back, sometimes forward, sometimes not at all." "That doesn't mean anything." "It means enough." I waited for more, but she had already looked away. After a few more minutes, the bus started moving again. None of the three strangers returned. The stairway vanished behind us. The platform disappeared into snow and darkness, and I knew somehow, with a cold certainty that settled deep in my stomach, that they were not coming back on this trip. I should have been panicking harder than I was. Instead, I was trapped in that awful state, where fear has become too large to be useful. Everything inside me had narrowed down to one question. What was the last stop? We drove in silence for what felt like half an hour. Then the girl in the rear seat finally pulled her hood down. I turned just enough to see her profile. She looked about my age, pale, tired, dark hair pulled back messily. Her face was drawn in a way that made her seem older than she should have been. She was staring at the window on the opposite side of the bus, but when she spoke, it was clearly to me. "You're new to this part." I didn't answer. She looked at me in the reflection. "You've only seen the edges before," she said. "That's why you could still go home." I swallowed hard. What does that mean? It means the bus has noticed you. The words hit me like a slap. I stared at her. The bus. She gave a tiny nod, almost impatiently. Not the route, the bus. I felt my mouth go dry. What is that supposed to mean? She leaned back and looked at the dark glass again. It means if you stop asking stupid questions, you may still make it back with your name intact. That was the first time I genuinely felt like I might throw up. Before I could say anything else, the elderly woman across from me interjected, her voice sharp now, completely different from before. "Enough." The girl shut up instantly. That alone told me everything I needed to know about the hierarchy on this bus. Whatever these people were, whatever they understood, the old woman outranked them. The bus moved on. At some point, I realized the city lights were gone. It's not dimmed, gone. Outside was now a long, flat stretch of darkness broken only by occasional trees and the weak spill of the bus's headlights. The road had become narrower too, so narrow it looked almost unfinished. Snow blew across it in thin waves. I couldn't see any proper lane markings anymore. Then the bus turned, and there it was. Terminal 9. I know that sounds impossible. It looked impossible. But there it was in front of us, rising out of the snow like a place that had been waiting under the city's skin all along. It was not a normal bus station. It was too large, too old, too still. A wide concrete platform stretched out beneath a long roof supported by iron beams. Dozens of lights hung overhead, but most were dead. The ones still working cast a sour yellow glow across the station floor. There were ticket windows, though I could not see anyone behind them. There were benches bolted to the ground. There were signs with route numbers that made no sense, all of them faded or half-rotated, as if time had damaged them in different directions. And the strangest part. There were other buses. Old buses like ours. Different colors, different numbers, all idling under the roof, some with doors open, some with headlights off, some with passengers boarding or getting out in complete silence. The station was full of people. Or things that moved like people. And every single one of them looked like they knew exactly where they were going. My mouth went dry. Victor pulled us into a bay and turned the engine off. The entire bus seemed to exhale. Nobody moved. Then, very quietly, Victor stood up from his seat, turned halfway toward the passengers, and said something I will never forget. "Last stop," he said. "Everyone who still remembers gets off now." The doors opened, and the old woman with the headscarf looked directly at me and said, "You're coming with me."